What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for NFL Week 1. Final look.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon.
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to go over my top picks for this week's NFL slate. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made. What's up, guys? This is the real Chris. Gonna do a Draft Dashboard video for you here today. I'm a little rusty, so we'll see how it goes. So this is gonna be for the main slate, the main Sunday slate. Let's take a look at the quarterback position. So I know this is a stud pick here, most expensive player on the slate, but I had to point him out because of the matchup. Take a look at Josh Allen from the Buffalo Bills playing the Arizona Cardinals, who have the absolute worst defense overall. Actually, they have the second worst defense overall, give up the fourth most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. And Josh Allen averaged 25.3 fantasy points per game on the season last year. He was getting an average of 6.5 rush attempts per game. And in his last 3 games, he scored 31, 34, and 29 fantasy points. And he had 12, 8, and 15 rush attempts. So as a rushing quarterback, he can put those yards and touchdowns and points on the board. Those fantasy points can stack up fast, giving him a high ceiling in a fantastic matchup here. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 47 points scored in this game. And they have the Buffalo Bills favored by 6.5. So Josh Allen is 8,000 DraftKings salary, projected at 23.4 fantasy points here this week. So I like Josh Allen here versus the Arizona Cardinals. Okay, another quarterback that I like is Baker Mayfield from the Tampa Bay Bucks playing the Washington football team. Are they still called the Washington football team? No, the Washington Commanders? Yeah, I thought Washington football team was better. But yeah, Baker Mayfield, he's playing the Washington Commanders, who have the absolute worst defense overall, and they gave up the absolute most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks last year. Baker Mayfield, he averaged 17.4 fantasy points per game on the season, getting 3.7 rush attempts per game, so he'll rush the ball every once in a while. And he scored 29 and 30 fantasy points in his last 2 games. He's 5,600 DraftKings salary, so he's a salary saver here at quarterback with a fantastic matchup. Projected at 17.2 fantasy points here this week, but you see he's got that 30 fantasy point upside for a low price tag. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 42.5 points scored in this game, so somewhat low scoring game here. But they have the Tampa Bay Bucks favored by 3.5. So I like Baker Mayfield as a value play in a fantastic matchup here versus the Washington Commanders. Okay, let's take a look at the running back position. I like Alvin Kamara from the New Orleans Saints playing the Carolina Panthers, who have a pretty good defense overall, but they give up the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing running backs. And Alvin Kamara averaged 17.9 fantasy points per game on the season last year, with an average of 13.9 rush attempts and 6.6 pass targets per game, so over 20 touches a game. And it's nice to see that he gets those pass targets, which he can break out, score a touchdown. Love those dual threat running backs. So Alvin Kamara, he's only 6,700 DraftKings salary, so I think that's a reasonable price tag. Projected at 15.7 fantasy points here this week. Vegas thinks there's going to be 41.5 points scored in this game, with the Saints favored by 4. So I like Alvin Kamara here versus the Carolina Panthers. Real quick guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all the tools for NFL. This is a great time to get in and try everything for 1 month. The tools are all about saving research time. You can see the last 3 games, the fantasy points per game, the targets they got per game, so you can see how involved they are in the offense, the rushes they got per game. Seeing all this stuff on one screen helps you save time and make better picks. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups. Now, I also like Joe Mixon from the Houston Texans playing the Indianapolis Colts, who have the 7th worst defense overall, and they give up the 4th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Joe Mixon averaged 15.9 fantasy points per game on the season last year, got an average 15.1 rush attempts per game, and 3.8 pass targets per game. So he also was averaging 20 plus touches per game. That's lots of volume. For the last 3 games, he scored 28, 19, and 9 fantasy points. He's 6,600 DraftKings salary, projected at 14.3 fantasy points here this week. And now Vegas thinks there's going to be 49 points scored in this game, so a high-scoring game with the Houston Texans favored by 3. But that's a nice, close, competitive, high-scoring game with a good matchup and a pretty decent price tag with a lot of upside. So I like Joe Mixon here versus the Indianapolis Colts. Okay, let's take a look at the wide receiver position. So I like Calvin Ridley from the Tennessee Titans playing the Chicago Bears, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. They were middle-of-the-pack defending opposing wide receivers. Calvin Ridley averaged 14.2 fantasy points per game on the season last year. He got 8 pass targets per game. He was on the field for 85% of the snaps, projected at 11.8 fantasy points here this week. He's 5,800 DraftKings salary, and Vegas thinks there's going to be 44.5 points scored in this game, with the Titans trailing by 3.5. So if the Titans going to be trailing in this game, they might need a little bit more Calvin Ridley down the field at a pretty good price tag. And he did score 26 fantasy points in his last game off of 10 pass targets, 8 fantasy points off of 8 pass targets the game before, and 26 fantasy points off of 9 pass targets the game before that. So he's coming off of a good performance last season. Let's see what he can do here this week. I like Calvin Ridley here versus the Chicago Bears. Another wide receiver that I like, a former Patriot, Jacobi Meyers from the Las Vegas Raiders playing the LA Chargers, who have a bad defense. They were the 5th worst defense overall last year, gave up the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Jacobi Meyers, he averaged 13.7 fantasy points per game on the season last year, getting an average of 6.6 pass targets per game, was on the field for 86% of the snaps. Only 5,000 DraftKings salary, projected at 10.3 fantasy points here this week. Now, the one stat I didn't like here, a low-scoring game. Vegas thinks there's only going to be 39.5 points scored in this game, with the Raiders trailing by 3. But it should be a close, competitive game, and it's such a good matchup at a low price tag with 20-plus fantasy point upside, a guy who's proven himself. I like Jacobi Meyers here versus the LA Chargers. Okay, moving on to the tight end position. I like Evan Ingram from the Jacksonville Jaguars playing the Miami Dolphins, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, but they gave up the 4th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends last year, and Evan Ingram was averaging 13.7 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 8.4 pass targets per game, which is fantastic for a tight end, leading his class. On the field for 79% of the snaps, projected at 11.9 fantasy points, only 5,500 DraftKings salary, and Vegas thinks this is going to be a high-scoring game. 49 points scored in this game, with the Jacksonville Jaguars trailing by 3.5. So they could be trailing, could need some more passing action down the field to Evan Ingram in a good positional matchup here. And Evan Ingram scored 24, 12, and 19 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 13, 6, and 15 pass targets. So lots of volume and lots of production in a good matchup here. So I like Evan Ingram here versus the Miami Dolphins. Okay, let's give you a sleeper pick or a value play here at the tight end position. I like Cade Aoun from the Tampa Bay Bucks, playing the Washington Commanders, who have the absolute worst defense overall, middle of the pack defending opposing tight ends. Cade Aoun, he averaged 6.9 fantasy points per game on the season last year. He only got an average of 3.9 pass targets per game, but he was on the field for 96% of the snaps. And if you look at his last 3 games, he scored 18, 17, and 5 fantasy points in his last 3 games off of 8, 11, and 3 pass targets. So he had 19 pass targets in his last 2 games and a combined 35 fantasy points in his last 2 games. So he was on the field pretty much every snap. He started getting super involved in the game towards the end of the season, which could be an indicator for what's going to happen here in week 1 at a low price tag with a pretty good matchup versus a weak overall defense. Vegas thinks there's going to be 42.5 points scored in this game, with the Tampa Bay Bucks favored by 3.5. So I like Cade Aoun here versus the Washington Commanders.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video.
Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smiggity smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NFL slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.